Could Gary Patterson really return to this Texas football team? Big if true.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. And on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, we're discussing Gary Patterson. Could he really return to the University of Texas for a second year in a row? In the second segment, I talk about 5 non-starters on this Texas football team who need to excel in their role this season. And in the third segment, 5 freshmen who should not or will not redshirt for this Texas football team. A lot of Texas football talk on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we made it to Friday, Longhorn Nation, and whoever else is listening, long week for me. I know it's been a long week for a lot of people listening as well. So glad we're here. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'm always thankful for your support. Please like, please subscribe if you enjoy the show, whether it's on audio or video. Once again, I'm thankful for everybody, that taps into Locked On Longhorns. Also, before we get into the Texas football talk, I want to talk to my baseball fans. As you can see on YouTube, I'm repping the Rangers hat. Another Lone Star showdown this week. Astros took the series. 2 out of 3. They won the first 2 games. It was a lot of craziness. Thankfully, I went to the right game on Wednesday. I was at Minute Maid when the Rangers won 13-5, and it was a lot of intensity in the building. Jordan got hit. Marcus Semien got hit. Nate Lowe almost got hit. We chased Fromber. Fans were fighting. The benches cleared. It was just a crazy game, but the Rangers made a statement, 13-5. I think both teams made a statement. The Astros took the series. Rangers came back and, won a blowout in game 3 and kept their division lead. And it's been fun, all year to see Astros and Rangers fans going at it. It's the first time in years that both teams are good, and it's been a fight all year in the division, and it'll continue to be a fight for the rest of the season. That series in September back in Arlington is going to be a ton of fun, and I don't know if I'd be able to handle it, but man, how fun would it be if these two teams ended up facing off in the playoffs, even the ALCS, to possibly go to the World Series. So hopefully both teams can get healthy. Hopefully both teams can continue to take care of business. And the next series in September should be fun. And hopefully the next few years between the Astros and the Rangers are as intense as it has been this season, because man, it's fun, to see these two teams that hate each other go against each other, and to see the fans interact that hate each other go against ech other. The rivalry is definitely back in the state of Texas. Now, sticking in the state of Texas, let's talk about football. And Gary Patterson was such a huge, asset to this Texas football team last year. We saw a much improved defense from 2021 to 2022, right? And I think that Gary Patterson wasn't the sole reason for that. We had a lot of talks on here about fans giving Gary Patterson too much credit and not giving Pete Kwiatkowski enough credit. But nonetheless, his ability to work collaboratively with Pete Kwiatkowski on the defense last year, after being one of the top defensive minds in college football for over 20 years, one of the best coaches in college football for over 20 years, for him to be able to accept the special assistant role and work under Steve Sarkisian and Pete Kwiatkowski worked really well for this Texas football team last year. And now Chip Brown from Horns 24/7 and Bobby Burton from Inside Texas have both reported that Gary Patterson is seriously considering a return to the coaching staff for the University of Texas, right? He, after the Alamo Bowl, spent some time with family, vacationing and doing all of that. But as we get closer to the football season, as fans are anxious for the football season, it seems like Gary Patterson is as well. And, maybe he's missing, being on the sidelines or in the box, whatever, helping coaching, young men on the defensive side of the ball, and, helping this Texas football team as he did last year. So, we've heard that if he wanted to return, the door would be open and he would make his decision around August. Well, August is next week. Fall camp is next week. And so we should know by this time next week if Gary Patterson will be on staff or not. But he was a huge asset to the Texas football team last year, and you would have to believe that he would be a huge asset to the Texas football team this season. And when you look at what he was able to do last year, I think he worked a lot with the secondary, and I was really proud of what the secondary was able to accomplish last year. I thought Anthony Cook was really good. I'm wishing him the best in his future endeavors, if he can stick on in the NFL. And I thought Jaron Thompson was a really special player for us last season. Honorable mention Big 12. I think this year he can crack the first first or second team. I'm excited to see him in a leadership role, in a veteran role on this Texas football team. And even at corner, right? I thought Deshaun Jameson, Terrence Brooks, Jahdae Barron, Jalen Gilbo, Austin Jordan, Ryan Watts, whoever played at the corner position in a significant role last year did really well for the most part for this Texas football team. Also, when you look at our two biggest games of the year, it was the defense that kept us in the game where the offense really didn't show up. In the Alabama game, you held a 40-point per game offense to 20 points, right? And, the biggest reason maybe the offense couldn't show up is because Quinn Ewers got hurt. But even in the running game, right, Bijan and Roschine couldn't get anything going. It was our defense that kept us in that game and gave us a chance to knock off the number 2 team in the country. Against TCU, we were fully healthy. And the defense even spotted us 7 points, and we still couldn't win that game. But you have to believe that not only just those 2 games, but every week, Gary Patterson was a huge part of the game plan, self-scouting, giving his suggestions, to Pete Kwiatkowski, letting him know how he would attack this offense, how this offense might attack the defense, et cetera, et cetera. And you would have to think Pete Kwiatkowski is somebody who probably has all the respect in the world for Gary Patterson, was taking as much as he could from him and incorporating it into the game plan. And that's just kind of the quantitative, way that he helped this Texas defense last year. But let's look at the numbers, right? Let's help really put it into perspective of what Gary Patterson's addition to this Texas football team last year might have looked like statistically. So in 2021, points allowed, we gave up 31.1 points per game, a big reason why we went 5-7. You're not going to win at the highest level giving up 31 points a game in college football. In 2022, that dropped almost 10 points down to 21.6. So credit to the players for developing and buying in, Pete Kwiatkowski, and then, of course, Gary Patterson. Total defense in 2021, you gave up 425 yards per game, which ranked 100th in the country. Not going to cut it, not the standard at the University of Texas. In 2022, that was down to 368 yards per game, almost 60 yards per game, 54th in the country, up from 100th the year before. A lot better. Rushing defense. I know that, Gary Patterson is mostly working with the secondary, but the secondary tackles too, right? And we're talking about rushing defense because that was such a huge problem for Texas in 2021, right? Those I-35 size holes that people were just running through. I mean, teams were just grinding out the clock and running us off the field in the second half of games. It was crazy. We were giving up 201 yards per game, which is insane to even say on Locked On Longhorns, 114th in the country. In 2022, that dropped down to 125 yards per game, 33rd in the country. We were one of the best rush defenses in the Big 12 and definitely one of the best rush defenses in the country at 33rd. So got to give credit to, the players, the whole defensive staff, including, Pete Kwiatkowski and Gary Patterson for the improvement last year. And I think that if he were to come back to this staff, we've added a lot of talent. We did lose Debo, Keandre Coburn and Moro Ojimo, but I think this team is more than capable. I should say, that's a better way of saying it, of matching what they did last year on the defensive end or improving with all of the players you brought back, bringing in players like Jalen Catalan via the transfer portal or Malik Muhammad and Anthony Hill in this freshman class, right? I think this defense can be really special. And a coach like Gary Patterson, who has been one of the best defensive minds in college football for the last 20 years, would only be an asset to this Texas football team. And I really love that Steve Sarkisian, and I've said this before, but I really love that Steve Sarkisian has no ego when it comes to building this Texas football team and doing what it needs to win. Like, obviously he has an ego, but he's now added in consecutive years Paul Chryst and Gary Patterson, who undoubtedly have more impressive head coaching resumes than Steve Sarkisian, right? And he's been willing to bring them on staff to help this Texas football team. So Gary Patterson, 181-79 all time in terms of his career record, 11-6 in bowl games, including 2 New Year's 6 bowl wins and 6 conference championships in 3 different conferences, would absolutely be an asset to this defense, helping out Pete Kwiatkowski as a special assistant to Sark or Pete Kwiatkowski, whoever, but we need him. I think we'll be really good without him. But like I said, you can't, poo-poo or say we don't need somebody who's been one of the best coaches in college football for the last 20 years. And I think this defense would only take another step if you put Gary Patterson back on the sideline. So GP, if you're listening to this by any chance, come home. We need you. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we're going to talk about 5 non-starters who still need to play a big role for this Texas football team in 2023. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. And if you want to find those qualified candidates faster, then post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free and find the qualified candidates you need to take your company to the next level. Terms and conditions do apply. Okay, so it's a Friday, and I'm thinking, like, what can I do for 3 segments on today's Locked On Longhorns? So the second thing I came up with in this segment is non-starters that need to excel in their role this year. And I think we saw a lot of rotations last year, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. But, players that didn't start that still came in and had a significant role for this Texas football team, or maybe players that you weren't expecting to have that role, but because of injuries and other things, they stepped in and were really good for this Texas football team. So non-starters this year in the 2023 season that I think still need to be superstars in their role for the Texas football team to reach their goal of winning the Big 12 championship this year. And the first one for me is Alfred Collins. And it's been kind of disappointing over the last few weeks. In the beginning of the offseason, we heard so much, positivity about Alfred Collins from Inside Texas and Horns 24/7, wherever you get your off-season reports, wherever you get your Kool-Aid in the off-season, right? That's what I should say. And we heard so many good things about Alfred Collins. It was a contract year, and he just came into camp and all of that with the spring ball with a different intensity, a different focus. He was showing more consistency in terms of the plays he was making, and he looked primed for a big year, right? But then over the last few weeks, we've started to see some reports that Vernon Broughton has been really good and has kind of probably jumped Alfred Collins in that pecking order in terms of the interior defensive line. And that's not what we want to hear, because we know that there's players like, Vernon Broughton and maybe other players in that room, Trill Carter, that probably are more consistent and have more of a motor than Alfred Collins. And we've been waiting to see that consistency since 2020. But when Alfred Collins flashes, he flashes. Like that play in the Colorado game, he made a huge play on the goal line last year against Iowa State that ended up keeping them out of the end zone before Jalen Ford got that pick in the end zone, I think. So, when he makes splash plays, he splashes. Like he flashes, jumps off your screen. He's that talented. And we know that Alfred Collins should be one of the best players on this Texas football team. The only question mark is motor and consistency. But that's a huge question mark. And within the last few weeks, it seems as though Vernon Broughton has jumped Alfred Collins on the depth chart solely because of that motor and consistency. So I think Alfred Collins still needs to have a huge year for this Texas football team, right? T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy cannot play every snap as big bodies on that Texas defensive line. You're going to have to rely on players behind them like Alfred Collins, Trill Carter, and Vernon Broughton. And I think Alfred Collins, by a decent margin, is the most talented player out of that group in terms of Vernon Broughton, Trill Carter, and Alfred Collins. I think he needs to flash, he needs to be consistent, and he needs to show a hungry and consistent motor to stay on the field for this Texas football team and make splash plays for this Texas football team, because just out of pure talent, he's probably one of the 10 most talented players, 15 at worst, on this Texas football team. And it's a shame that we haven't really been able to see it since 2020. I think he needs to have a big year. Gavin Holmes, I'm saying this because I think that Terrence Brooks ends up winning the starting job opposite of Ryan Watts, but you obviously didn't bring Gavin Holmes in from the transfer portal to just be depth, and he was a really good player the last 2 years at Wake Forest, 2 of the best years in Wake Forest football history, right? And Gavin Holmes was a big part of that on the defensive side of the ball. And even though he's smaller, I think he's 165, 170 pounds. He plays really well, plays bigger than his size, and his numbers look really good on PFF in terms of, his coverage and what he meant to that Wake Forest football team. So we saw last year that, we dealt with some injuries at that position. Deshaun Jameson missed a few games, but also it was just a position we naturally rotated at, right? We saw Austin Jordan, Jalen Gilbo, and maybe some other players come off the bench as well. And so I think that Gavin Holmes, even if he doesn't start, will play a big role for this Texas football team. Will get a lot of snaps. And I think that when he gets in, he needs to be as good as Jahdae Barron, Ryan Watts, or Terrence Brooks, and I think he certainly is capable of that. But I think he'll get a lot of snaps this year, maybe not a lot, but at least 100. And in those 100 snaps, he needs to be the Gavin Holmes we saw at Wake Forest. My next player is Keaton Crawford. And I just think this is solely about Jalen Catalon and his health, right? It's still going to be a mystery. We can say that he's going to be really good this year. Jade Barron said we're going to get the best version of Jalen Catalon. We can all knock on wood all we want to. But at the end of the day, he's had significant injury concerns the last 2 years, right? And so we don't know if we're going to get a full season from Jalen Catalon. So that would thrust Keaton Crawford probably into a bigger role. And there were times last year where he was taking advantage of, in man coverage when he came into the game to spell, Anthony Cook or Jaron Thompson. I think Jaron Thompson is going to be really good, and I think he'll be on the field almost all of the time, except when he needs a breather. But Jalen Catalon is more of a mystery at this point. And so I think that Keaton Crawford is going to have to play a big role for this Texas football team, whether it's just in a natural rotation or being that next man up if something were to happen to Jalen Catalon or Jaron Thompson. And we know he has the athletic profile to be really good at safety. If he's gotten better this year than he was last year, he'll certainly be a really good depth piece and somebody who can be a superstar in their role off the bench for this Texas football team. The next one is kind of going to surprise you, maybe the next two, but I'm going with Casey Kane. And I know people are thinking, well, we brought in Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, Ryan Niblett. Why would we even need Casey Kane? There's people that thinking that Casey Kane was bad last year, and I think he had a bad game, but we only used 2 receivers, right? He didn't have enough opportunity to be bad last year, right? But when I look at how the receiver room is set up, you would think that it's probably Xavier Worthy with Jonte Cook behind him at that position. I'm not going to get into all the letters and the formations, right? Because I'm not an expert on that. I'll save that for Homer. In the slot, you're looking at Jordan Whittington, DeAndre Moore, and probably Ryan Niblett right there. So I think on the outside, you're looking at A.D. Mitchell, Isaiah Nayor, and then Casey Kane. Well, A.D. Mitchell has missed a lot of time his last 2 years at the University of Georgia. And then obviously Isaiah Nayor is coming off an ACL injury. You don't know exactly what you're going to get from those two. So you may be, in a position where you don't have to use Casey Kane this year. That certainly would be a luxury. But I'm looking at 2 players in front of him who have dealt with a lot of injuries over the last 2 years. And we can't just assume that they're going to be fully healthy this year and we're not going to need to use Casey Kane at all. So in the event that A.D. Mitchell goes down and Isaiah Nayor is not 100% healthy or can't handle a full workload, you're going to have to rely on Casey Kane as a big body receiver on the outside. And I think he's somebody that's more than capable of making plays for this Texas football team. I think he did it last year when he got the opportunity. So Casey Kane could be somebody that we need to rely on, not because of performance, but because he's behind 2 players, big body players at the receiver position who have dealt with a lot of injuries and missed a lot of games the last few years in college football, whether at the University of Texas or at the University of Georgia. And then my last player, a non-starter that needs to excel in his role, is Savion Red. And I could have went with Cedric Baxter or Jaden Blue, but I think that it's going to be really a running back by committee, right? I think that Jonathan Brooks will get the majority of the snaps, but all 3 of those players are going to be huge parts of this football team. So I couldn't say any of them are really coming off the bench, right? That's like saying Roschon Johnson came off the bench last year. Like, he really didn't, right? He was just the number 2 running back. The Savion Red is certainly going to come off the bench, and he's somebody who did it all in high school: quarterback, receiver, running back. And, last year he was a receiver for this Texas football team. This year he's a running back, right? He can do a little bit of everything. He's just a football player, like Steve Wilfon said about Aaron Hampton. You put him on the field, give him the ball, good things are going to happen. It's just that simple, right? You don't even have to put a label or a position on him. And I think this year it's going to be hard to keep him off the field, even with all the receivers we have, even with all the running backs we have. So, Steve Sarkisian, one of the best in the business in terms of designing offense and creating mismatches, he's going to find a creative way to use Savion Red. And I think in that specific role, Savion Red is going to have to be a superstar, whether it's that, physical pounding running back at the end of games, whether it's somebody who can really give you a lot of trouble in the RPO because you don't know if he's going to catch the ball or run the ball. Whatever it is, Savion Red will have a very defined role on this Texas football team this year. And whatever that role is, I expect him to be a superstar in it. And that'll take this Texas football team to the next level. A quick word from our sponsors once again, and then we're getting into 5 freshmen that won't or should not redshirt in the 2023 season. For a championship team, it's all about making sure that every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time that you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure that every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know that the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay guaranteed fit only, available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Broncos country. Let's ride. All right, the first thing I thought of when I heard that was Russell Wilson. I'm like, I got to throw that out there. Hopefully they have a good season, man. Shout out the Broncos. I used to live in Colorado, so I always support them. I was a military brat. I don't know if I've said that on the show before, so I've lived everywhere. Freshmen that won't or should not redshirt this year, right? And I think that some of these are kind of easy, This might be just me pulling a third segment out of my what, but here we are, right? Freshmen that won't or should not redshirt this season. Cedric Baxter obviously won't redshirt, right? Duh, John. You know what I mean? He's going to be a huge part of the running back rotation. Like I said in the last segment, I'm not sure. I think Jonathan Brooks will be the bell cow, but I wouldn't be surprised if Jaden Blue and Cedric Baxter both have over 150 touches this season themselves. Maybe that's not possible. I don't know. But Cedric Baxter and Jaden Blue will be big parts of the Texas football team. Number one running back in the country coming out of high school in this last cycle out of Orlando, Florida. He's definitely going to play in more than 4 games. Texas needs him to play in more than 4 games, and I think he's going to be really good. So he will not redshirt this season, and Texas doesn't need him to redshirt. They need him on the field. Anthony Hill, he won't start the season as a starter. I think eventually he'll end up a starter. If not this season, then he'll definitely be a starter the next 2 years on this Texas football team in the SEC. But he's going to have a huge role this year, similar to DeMarvion Overshown, just not in the starting role, right? You're going to bring him in, definitely as a situational pass rusher. You're going to bring him in as a rotation piece for our linebackers. And he's just somebody that can do a little bit of everything, right? He's a special player. And whatever you ask him to do, I think he's going to work his hardest to make sure he can do it at a high level, right? Somebody who just eats, sleeps, and breathes football. That's what his head coach and defensive coordinator at Denton Ryan said. It's just somebody who absolutely loves the sport and will do whatever it takes to be a leader and be there for his teammates. So whatever Pete Kwiatkowski and hopefully Gary Patterson, right, ask him to do this year, he'll be able to do it and hopefully do it at a high level. But I think that Texas will need him in more than 4 games this year. If he doesn't play in more than 4 games this year, I will riot personally, and I'll bring a lot of y'all with me because that would be an absolute travesty. I think that even though he doesn't start, he's one of the 11 most talented players on this defense right now. We should see Anthony Hill in more than 4 games this season for the Texas football team. Malik Muhammad, this one is a little questionable. I'm not sure if he'll play in more than 4 games. Of course, if he's on special teams, then, that would help out. Not sure if we'll need him as much in the corner rotation this year, but you're talking about somebody who got dropped at the end of the cycle, but still ended up as a top 75 player in the country. He was a top 30 to 40 player most of the cycle in terms of 2023, and somebody that can do it all, right? Has a really good pedigree coming out of South Oak Cliff. I think won 2 straight state championships at South Oak Cliff. So he's obviously a really good player coming over with Billy Walton, his cousin, to the University of Texas, and somebody that, is good in man coverage, is good in zone coverage, understands what offenses are trying to do, understands film study, where he's supposed to be. And as a corner, he gives you that extra oomph, right, and run support. He's not afraid to come down and make tackles. Just a solid football player that loves the University of Texas, loves the game, and will be a starter for us and a huge asset for us going into the SEC. But this year, I think they can find a scenario where he can play in 4 games or more. I also think that this will factor in that Texas will just be really good this year. And I think even outside of the Wyoming and Rice game, there should be at least 2 games in your conference schedule where Texas gets to rest their starters. There should be at least 2 games where Texas is beating a team by at least 20 points in the 4th quarter and says, hey, we're going to put our bench players in, right? And I think Malik Muhammad could be one of those players to get in that scenario. So with everything I just said, I think that Malik Muhammad very possibly could play in 4+ games for the Texas Longhorns this year. Derek Williams, and I talked about Keaton Crawford, being the depth behind Jaron Thompson and Jalen Catalon. We know that depth matters a lot. Experience matters a lot, I should say, to Steve Sarkisian and this Texas football staff. So Derek Williams might be behind him. Michael Taft might be behind him as well. But I think Derek Williams is more talented and eventually will be better than both of those players I just mentioned, Keaton Crawford and Michael Taft. I think he's somebody that could step in right now, definitely on special teams, but even in a safety rotation, depending on how many players you wanted to bring in, I think he could step in right now and make plays for this Texas football team. And in a similar situation to Malik Muhammad, like I said, somebody who you could get experience on the field and a lot of snaps on the field in late in games if Texas has the game sold up, right? If Texas is winning by 20+ points late into the fourth quarter, he's somebody that you could put in the game and get actual game reps, right, in preparation in terms of moving to the SEC. So I think Derek Williams might be the third most talented safety on the roster right now, right? Definitely think he'll be a starter for us when we get to the SEC next year, but he's somebody that we could use on this Texas football team in 4 or more games if they choose to this season. And then my last player or players, I'm going with Tassili Akana or Colton Vasek. And the reason I went with multiple players is because I think we're just going to need a pass rush from one of these true freshmen, however it comes. And I'm not sure who's developed more, Tassili Akana or Colton Vasek at this point, but I think either one of them is good enough to come in on a third down and make a play, right? Either one of them is good enough to come in on a third down and get to the quarterback one time, right? Or put pressure on the quarterback one time. And in a similar situation with Malik Muhammad and Derek Williams, if Texas has the game sold up late in the game and you could take the starters out, why not put players like Tassili Akana or Colton Vasek on the field to get in-game reps, players you're going to have to rely on a lot more over the next 2 seasons in the SEC, right? It's important to get them on the field and build that confidence. So whether it's Tassili Akana or Colton Vasek, could be both of them. I would like to see one of them play in at least 4 games this year for the Texas Longhorns, a season in which we should make it to the Big 12 championship game and hopefully win it. Gary Patterson, if you're still listening, come home. Have a good weekend, Longhorn Nation. Hook 'em. Peace.